So thank you, Ebony, for joining us today for today's Lunch with Nonprofit Leaders series conversation. Really looking forward to this conversation with you today. And thank you also to our guests who are here with us today. Just a reminder that we are recording the first half, probably until about 12:30. So, just a warning, your audio or your video might be caught up in the recording. So I encourage you to turn your video off and mute yourself during the interview portion. And then at around 12:30 or so, we'll invite you in to ask Ebony any questions that you have. So with that, let's get started. So, Ebony, my first few questions deal with fundraising, particularly online fundraising, because that's the topic of this week's class in Nonprofit Leadership and Social Innovation. So, you founded the Young Black and Giving Back Institute and the Give 828 campaign, in which you help Black-led and Black-benefiting nonprofits raise money for their causes on the anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. This year, Young Black and Giving Back raised over $250,000 for nearly 500 organizations. So we're curious, what were some of the key ingredients in the overwhelming success of this fundraising campaign?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Charlie. I'm really excited to be here and speak with the students. So, hey, everybody. So the day itself, I'll start with the Give 828. And yes, that is the day that Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech, but it's also a day that's pretty significant in the Black community across the board. So it is the day, unfortunately, that Emmett Till was killed. It is also the day that then Senator Barack Obama made his confirmed his run for presidency. So that was a pretty exciting opportunity, for us there. Also found out that it was also the day that Jackie Robinson made it to the major league. So it was a really, really big day. And then we found out this year, unfortunately, it is the day that our King T'Challa went on to glory. So the day, it just serendipitously just has a lot of significance within the Black community. And so that was the draw initially for the day, as a day for us to be able to celebrate. Give 828 on August 28th falls at the end of Black Philanthropy Month, which for a few years now, has been the celebratory time to uplift and recognize the magic and the beauty of Black philanthropy. And so when we first started this particular day in 2018, we wanted it to be an opportunity for organizations that don't really get an opportunity to shine for larger giving days. So one of our partners, Giving Tuesday, it has done an amazing job for providing a giving day for nonprofits. However, what happens is oftentimes a lot of the bigger nonprofits end up sort of taking the space, right? So Salvation Armies of the world and the Red Crosses, et cetera, because they have a bigger platform. Some of the smaller organizations don't really get a chance to fundraise as well. And then we recognize in our experience with our organizations, a lot of times, this is the first time that they're doing any sort of crowdfunding online gathering of donors. And so after our own fundraising day in 2017, I said, if we can do it, we have enough organizations in our sort of repository of friends, if you will, that we can use this day to focus on the beauty of Black giving. So it was a matter of us galvanizing, Black social entrepreneurs. We had a number of organizations that were pretty new to the space, organizations that had some traction, but just needed a push to fundraise. And what better opportunity than to tell people the great work you're doing when you have hundreds of other Black organizations that are being celebrated too. So it's really about community and fundraising in community that I believe made the day successful. And the strong history and the weight of the day really drew people in to learn some history that they didn't know before about the day.
That's really interesting. I didn't know all that background either, and all the significance and the symbolism of the day. So, this year's campaign was, you and your partners raised a lot more money than in years past. And I'm wondering, maybe in spite of the pandemic or maybe because of it. But what impact did COVID-19 have on this year's campaign? And what did you and your team learn any lessons about fundraising during a pandemic or during a crisis?
Yeah, so I think this year the pandemic was part of it, but largely it was the racial unrest that drew people to what the plight and the vulnerability that exists within the Black community, right? So I think what the pandemic did was it allowed people to sit still and have no excuse to ignore what's going on in our country, right? And so if all we're doing, if everybody's quarantined and, it's George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, excuse me, or Breonna Taylor, those three names that we now all know so very well. But there was Amadou Diallo before those three human beings. There was a Trayvon Martin before those three people. So there are and have been, there was an Emmett Till before the three of them. What the pandemic did was it forced largely majority white America to really be able to see what was going on. And you may have heard about it before, right? You may have gone to work or looked at the newspaper and said, oh, well, I heard another Black person was shot and killed by police. But it really, this time around, it hit differently because you really, really, really got to see why it has been so painful. And so what that did was that translated into this huge sort of reaction to, well, what can we do? How can we help? How can white person A, how can I educate myself to be anti-racist? How can I position myself better to be or learn how to be an ally? How can I do better with what I now know? And so that is how the pandemic had, I believe, helped our campaign. We had a number of new partners that we did not have before, that wanted to use their platform and use their networks to say, hey, we want to be able to support organizations. So whether it's, reproductive and maternal health for Black women, or whether it's, the small nonprofit accounting organization or community foundation, we found ourselves, or the University of Maryland, the Do Good Institute, wanting to be able to support Black-led, Black benefiting organizations, because now the education was there and the reality had hit, like it's not going anywhere. So what can we do? And so this day provided an opportunity to reach hundreds of organizations that are doing the work, that have been doing the work, whose founders have been paying out of their pockets, or, their donors are small. But this day really helped to, and the pandemic helped to shift the attention to organizations that have always been on the ground doing work, to get some additional and new help in ways that they had not gotten before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned being able to really expand your network, bring in a lot of new partners this year. And actually, this past Monday, I attended a virtual book launch for Tyrone Freeman's new book about,
Yep.
about the
Good friend of ours.
philanthropy
Yep.
of Stephen Walker. And he actually cited the Young Black Giving Back Institute as an example of like a burgeoning philanthropic movement towards, supporting Black-led and Black benefiting organizations in the United States. You've coined the phrase "Black giving is magic." And so I'm curious, what magic have you seen through Black philanthropy? And what would it take for some of this magic to rub off on the broader field of philanthropy?
I love your questions, Charlie. I told Charlie, guys, that he should have been a journalist in his former life. His questions are just so well-rounded. But, not to be confused with Black magic, right? So it's, and I know that's not what you were asking, but maybe that's what some people heard. But this is, Black giving is magic, right? Meaning that there is a effervescent feeling. There's a feel good. There is there's a payout that goes beyond the monetary when it comes to giving, right? Black people, we're a dope group of people, right? We're full of energy. We're full of community. We're full, we're a melanated people. Like, you can't be in a room full of Black people and just not feel joy, right? You can't go to a Black church and just not tap your toes or, bob your head. The music of the world is rooted in Black people, right? So when I think about the term Black giving is magic, literally comes out of the reality that Black people are magic, right? Like, this country was built on the backs of Black people. The amazingness, right? Argue with me and you'll lose every time. The amazingness of this entire world, right, is right in the center of the world, which is Africa. So there's no way that we can think about anything being magical, right? And when I think magic, I think, joy, right? Black joy comes out of who we are. And so the giving that we have always done within our communities is translated into this, the phrase Black giving is magic, right? The magic of supporting one another, the magic of celebrating one another, the magic of taking care of your neighbor, the magic of, maybe it's taking care of your grandmother, the magic of, saying, girl, don't worry about it. I got you today. Or, somebody who is wanting to build the next app, right? That's going to change the way kids learn. It could be the organization Neighborhood Well that actually was a recipient of the Do Good Institute's partnership with us. These Black women said, you know what, there's an unhoused population that are missing the opportunity to be clean, right? And we take advantage, or take for granted rather, the privilege we have every day to wake up and shower, right? If you're unhoused, like, think about how many days, hours, months you haven't had that. So the Neighborhood Well literally brings a portable shower to unhoused communities so people can feel whole and feel human, right? So these are ideas that are starting, in the minds, hearts, and bellies of Black folks. And so when we think about the magic that, that's translated from this day or from this movement, is being able to pour into organizations and pour into individuals that are making the difference and making the change that we have always seen, right? That's always been a part of who we are, but it's being able to, as you said, Charlie, sort of spread it, with the masses, right? And anyone can be part of sort of the Black giving is magic, right? And so it doesn't limit it to say that, non-Black folks or, white folks can't give to sort of make the day or make the movement more magical. Obviously, yes, it's all a part of it. We want you to feel the magic as well. And so that is part of it, for everyone to be able to feel the magic, but understanding that it comes from a place that's just part of who we are. Like, we can't help it.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. So I want to shift gears now and try to learn a bit from you, from the work that you do with your consulting practice, which is called Friends of Ebonie. So one of your areas of specialty is working with organizations to identify diversity, equity, and inclusion pain points and create sustainable programs to address their problems. So based on your experience, I'd like to know what you believe a nonprofit or business needs to do in order to actually follow through on improving their diversity and becoming more equitable and inclusive organizations. We hear, so much talk, but I want to talk about follow through from what you've seen. So I'm wondering if you can give maybe to highlight some examples, an example of an organization that you've worked with. You don't have to name any names. An organization that you've worked with that has succeeded and one that has failed, and kind of what were the main differences between the two?
Yeah, great question. So in the work that I do, it often overlaps with the Institute, just sort of carrying the same, these are the same moniker and sort of the same lessons, right? So my life kind of overlaps. I'm like a huge Venn diagram in my life. But thinking about organizations and what they can do, and I teach this to my students at University of Maryland, your board at the highest level of executive leadership, all the way down to the folks who make sure, in a normal space, keep your building clean, right? So from the top to the bottom, making sure that there's representation at every single level. And what that often means, particularly for nonprofits, is that there will be a lot of Black and brown folks at the administrative level, at the entry level, and maybe middle management. But then once you move past that middle management, junior, senior, executive level, it a lot of times becomes very white. And particularly when you're looking at the boards. And so even when we were helping organizations to understand this for 828 and signing up. So we were very intentional about making sure organizations were at least 50% Black in their staff and at least 50% Black in their boards to represent the community that they serve, because representation matters. If not, then who are the power players, who's making the decisions for the communities that you are looking to serve? And so what disservice are you giving to, let's say you're working with Black youth, and yes, all of your counselors look like the kids, all of, perhaps some of the managers that are managing the counselors look like the kids. But then when you pass that level, your executive director is white, your board is white. So who's really making the decisions for these Black and brown kids? That's problematic. That goes right back to the system that we're right now trying to dismantle. And so that's not to say that it has to be 100% Black, but there needs to be balance and majority representation so that even though we're not a monolithic people, there is an informed and an experienced advisement that's being given to the organization that's looking to serve Black communities, Black and brown communities. And so through my consulting work, that's what I help organizations get to. And so one example of that, which also crosses over to the Institute, and I can share the name because it is a success story, the Central Carolina Community Foundation, that has been a friend of ours since 2018. They were working with another friend, I guess, in the sector. Valeda Fullwood's book has now been turned into a interactive traveling exhibit around the country, and oftentimes it will partner with community foundations. Well, when this exhibit got to Columbia, South Carolina, while again well-intentioned, it was in the Richmond Library, right in the center of downtown Columbia, they reached a barrier because the organization, the community foundation at the time, did not have the relationships with the Black community in order to get them to come experience this exhibit. And this exhibit celebrates Black philanthropy, right? So at the time, our contact there was going to talk to Black churches about this Black exhibit, this very white, very, very, very white woman, bless her heart. As well-intentioned as she was, people kind of looked at her like, what are you doing here, lady? Like, okay, girl. But it wasn't until the end of the exhibit's time in South Carolina, now that word of mouth had gotten out and there were some stories going around, that Black people were like, oh, we got to go see this exhibit. But by that point, it was too late. And so, but what they asked me to come down and do was to sort of give the closing keynote, and what could they do to build relationship with the folks in the community. And so that's what we did. Went down, gave a keynote, sort of, handpicked the folks to be on the panel to talk about what Black giving and Black community looked like in the Midlands. And then we had a wonderful reception where we were able to have leadership from the Community Foundation and folks who were invited, who were leading organizations down in that area. Some were recipients of the Community Foundation's funds and others were new. But fast forward now 2 years, they have successfully created an affinity group, an African American affinity group for the Community Foundation, and which has allowed them to be even more intentional, not just about giving grants, but building relationships with the community that they are providing these resources for, which is of the utmost importance. So it's one of the success stories about, being able to go in, sort of help reframe the language that organizations have used in the past, so that they can better build relationships with the community that they're looking to serve. And then to your second part, not so successful story, that's a little bit harder to think. I mean, I can probably think more of, I would say, potential clients where you can tell that, okay, they're just not ready for this right now. Most recently, I had an organization reach out that wanted to have, some D&I training. Sure. And so I said to them, well, it's going to be important that we mention or talk about the idea of Black Lives Mattering. Like if this is something that's part of your organization, right? The people who are in your organization, like, come on, walk with me, like make sure we were all on the same page here. And their response was, well, maybe we should go the route of, what was the word she used? Can't think of the word she used, some alternative safe word, because she said, I'm really not sure where everyone sits with the idea of Black Lives Matter. And I said to her, I said, listen, what I do is not a therapy session. If people get uncomfortable, that's what it was. I said, some people might get uncomfortable with the conversation. And she said, well, what do you do then? I said, well, this is not a therapy session, right? This is an educational moment. And if folks do get uncomfortable, then maybe that demonstrates that there's more work to be done. But as an organization, here are the things that you're looking to do to be better. So I don't necessarily have a failure story, but just some organizations that just may not be ready. We've had organizations that have given pushback to the idea of being at least 50% Black in board and staff because they have a Black founder. They have pushed back to say, well, because I founded it, then we should be allowed to participate and give 828. And I said, well, you're missing the point. It's more about in action and what you're doing and making sure that there's representation across the board. I've even been told that I did not recognize the founder as a Black man because he was of lighter skin, or you must not have counted me in the number. I said, oh, Black man, you think that you're lighter than you are. So, I mean, I've had to have some strong conversations with some folks to kind of bring them back to reality, but I've not had any sort of failures. It's just about folks not being ready to sort of move into the space that they need to really have equity across the board.
That's understandable. I do want to follow up on one of your points. You talked about the importance of education, and you also talked about the importance of representation. If you're serving Black or Brown communities, you mentioned 50% of your staff, board, every level of the organization should represent the communities that you're serving. This is something I thought about a lot, actually, since reading Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, and just the concept of the power of being able to make decisions. And, I'm thinking about your point about representation. What do you think, maybe this is hypothetically, what do you think a nonprofit should do if they are underrepresenting the populations that they're serving? Should they replace some people within their ranks? Should they look to add positions? Maybe it's both. You mentioned the foundation that you worked with creating an affinity group. That sounds like sort of, like an additional body to represent the community that they want to serve. But this is something I've thought about, is whether power should be taken away from people who don't represent the communities that they're trying to serve and given to different groups of people. Obviously, that could be really tricky, but it seems it's something I've seen a few examples of, like, for instance, the board member at Reddit who gave up his seat and said, I want my seat to be taken by a Black person. Have you seen any other examples of that? Or how do nonprofits increase the representation when the seats are already full?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the example that the board member at Reddit gave, honorable at the very least. I think that is one route that an organization can take. But I also think that the idea of diversity, right, is just that it's diversity. It's not a monolith, right? So nowhere has anyone said that we're looking for it to be all Black or all Latino or all, I think then we're going right back to where we started. But diversity in and of itself is difference. And so when there's a slide that I use with my students in my class when we talk about privilege and power within organizations, right? And back to what I was saying in terms of the imbalance, great example. We recently heard that the CEO of Wells Fargo Bank said that he could not find Black talent at a certain level, whatever. Well, the argument that he presented was sort of laid out, I believe it was a New York Times or WA Post article, where his perspective was shaped by the fact that he, as a white man, has constantly reaped the benefits of being a white man. Did I say black? I meant white man, being a white man. From how he got hired at his previous job. I think he was at Goldman, if I'm not mistaken. Don't quote me on that. But his previous corporation, he was brought on by a mentor who then, when he got to Wells, he then hired his mentor's son, so forth and so on. So there's this cycle within hiring who we know in our networks that limits what we are able to see around us. And so what he said, obviously, there was a huge problem with what he said. But I think it spoke more to what we see within a system that's shaped by privilege, right? At the end of the day. So his life is led within his box and his bubble of white male privilege. And therefore, he's not able to see beyond that. But someone like me is able to see, well, obviously there are other Black folks at your level and beyond, but you don't see that because you constantly live this life in a box. And so what organizations may have the thought process like that, or say, well, all of our seats are filled. What then, from a very practical standpoint, you can put together a board matrix, right? When you're looking at recruitment, what are the things that we're looking for, from race to gender to education level, all of the things that we're looking for, and how are we going to make sure that our matrix is filled accordingly. So we're not just, handpicking people to say, we want one Black person, we want one Black man and two Black women. Well, what if that one Black man and two Black women don't necessarily fit? Like if you're looking for a treasurer, or maybe you're looking for someone with Marcom expertise, they may not fit into that. They may be someone else who thrives in governance. They may be someone else who thrives in operations. So you also can't pigeonhole the people that you want just because you need a Black person on there, right? Again, I will say we are not a monolithic group of people. We have a variety of skill sets and expertise that we can bring to the table. And that's how you should be picking the person to say, this is the seat that we need to fill, right? And we want to be able to find a person of color, right? If you want to go more broadly, to be able to fill this seat versus saying, well, we just want a Black person and that person is on there. But then what are they bringing to the table besides them just being Black, right? And you don't want to start having quota fills.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, if your board is quote unquote filled, here's the thing, you can do whatever you want as a board. That's why you're a board. So if you have 26 seats and you're saying that you're looking to diversify, you're looking to expand, you can add 2 more seats if you want. I'm sure there's somebody's tenure who's been on that board for a very, very, very long time. They might consider rolling off, or they might consider, sort of becoming, sitting in an advisory seat. As you mentioned, creating affinity groups. Like there are so many ways that we can sort of finesse this thing, right? So the excuse that, oh, the board seats are filled or we can't, there's no can't, right? That's the whole point of being a board. You can do what you want to do, right, with a board vote and a majority. And so I think that we are in a space now that we can be very creative in the way that we introduce diversity. We can be very creative and intentional about the ways that we outreach. And if you or someone are like the CEO of Wells Fargo and, don't know a Black person other than perhaps the person you might see, cleaning, right? Like that may be the person of color you see, then maybe it's time that you reach out to some of your contemporaries in the field, right? Like a Ken Chenault, who's right over there, or, at least served in the position of Amex equal to your level, to say, hey man, we need to have a conversation because this is what I'm looking to do, right? There's no way you can say that there's not a Black person at your level or beyond that you may not have a relationship with, but takes a quick Google search or a LinkedIn search to find, to have a coffee, to have a conversation. These are contemporaries. So you're at the same level to see how you can expand beyond your box.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, thank you. Thanks for engaging with me in that conversation. This conversation about philanthropy and race and nonprofit leadership and management and race. I think these are topics that don't get talked about enough, at our university, in our classes, in our programs. And so I'm glad that we got to have this conversation today. I just have one more question for you, because I want to make sure to give the rest of our guests plenty of time to interact with you. So my last question um, is about your maybe some career advice for our students. So I've been really inspired to learn how you've achieved success in your career by blazing your own trail. I'm curious, what have been some of the experiences that you've had and key decisions that you've made that have helped shape the career to where you are today?
Yeah. Oh, Charlie, what a question. I am knocking on the door at 40. I know I don't look like it, right? But I think along the way, I will give a fulfilling the failure question that you asked before, completely unrelated, but I have one, and then a success piece. I'll start with the failure piece. I think the biggest thing that I thought I knew, particularly when I came out of undergrad, and then let me sort of shape this a little bit. I grew up in a upper middle class Black family, right? So failure was never an option, right? Both of my parents went to college. They were, both had, graduate degrees. They were both social workers. Other women in my family, men in my family, they were educators, they were military folks. So my my benchmark for excellence was way up here, right? Always. And so I always felt like the opportunity to fail was never there, right? I always had to do well, extremely well, right? When your uncle is like a PhD and like since you were 2, he's like, you're going to be a doctor. You're like, what? So, the room for failure wasn't quite there, but I found out through trial and error that failure is a part of life. And I wish that if I had an opportunity to go back to, high school, college, right out of college, Ebonie, to say this decision that you're making, don't overthink it, because it may not turn out the way that you want it to be. But if that's not what you want to do, don't do it. And I found myself constantly making decisions to please my mom, to please what I thought other people, because if I go teach in Ethiopia for a year, despite the fear that my mom has because of the civil unrest, but is that going to fulfill my heart? If I take 5 from this job and go volunteer, for a couple weeks down in New Orleans after Katrina, is that gonna compromise, what I'm doing? So there were times that I did not do what I wanted or felt like I was called to do because I listened to someone else. But in the moments where I did leave my job and I went to work for the Obama campaign in 2008, while it was challenging, it felt good because I made a decision where I felt that I was doing something that I wanted to do and that I was called to do. And I could have easily gotten talked out of it again, but I pushed through because that was something I really wanted to do. So my advice for me, and sort of say failing to learn, right? Failing forward, is knowing that it is okay to fail forward and not feeling so bad if something doesn't work out. Was it a decision that you felt like you had the best information at the time that you could make, right? And putting things in perspective, if you are in your early 20s, this is the time to make those mistakes. These are the times to kind of figure it out, because we don't have it all figured out and it takes some time. But when you are living, if you don't come from a family like mine, there's now Instagram that you're now living, comparing yourself to, right? There are all these other social entrepreneurs and Instagram influencers that are telling you that, hey, you can do it too. But what if you don't feel like you can do that very thing, or you're failing, right, to reach that benchmark? It's all about finding the space where you're feeling called to go, even if it's just for that moment. And if you find out that it doesn't work, it is okay, because you can always pivot and make it work. And then I guess successfully, and it sounds so cliche, but it's so very true. When you begin to do something that you don't have to get paid for, then you know that you're doing the thing that you love to do, right? So make sure that your life is not filled with a lot of volunteer work, right? Because at some point you've got to eat, but there's a happy median of the things that you're called to do in terms of work, right? Where you can as they say, wake up every day and enjoy going to that job or doing that thing. There have been jobs that have literally made me sick. There's a Black woman who literally just stepped down from her chair at an architectural school, actually just about 2 weeks ago, because the pain of what she was doing, not that she didn't love architecture, but the racial, excuse me, inequity that existed in that role was too much for her to bear. And she said, in a sense, she said, I'm not going to martyr myself. I relent, I step back. And so sometimes we do have to make those decisions, because going into work or doing something that you literally hate that's making you sick is not good for you. If being a barista at Starbucks for 6 months is going to bring you joy, doggone it, go be a barista for 6 months at Starbucks. I'm still waiting to be a waitress in a Spanish restaurant for about 9 months of my life, because that's what's going to bring me joy. I know it will. But my point is if it's something that you know deep down you are not loving, pivot. Pivot smart, right? Fail forward, and it's okay. Pick up the pieces and move to the thing. Get closer to the thing that you know you love to do, so that you can wake up every day, get paid to do it. And if sometimes you volunteer, take on a pro bono client, that's fine. But you don't want to live the better part of your days miserable, right? Getting paid for something that you don't like to do.
Yeah, thank you. That resonates so much with me.
Well, don't quit now, Charlie. Don't. I hope they know, Charlie. We love you. Okay.
Before. I've been there. I've gone through that. But I wish I had heard that message 10 years earlier.
Yeah, love you all.
So thank you. If any of our students, before I bring my colleague Olivia in to facilitate the rest of our conversation with the rest of our guests, if any of our guests want to follow up with you, what's the best way for them to find you?
Yes. I know I have a colleague on here, Chelsea, who's probably chuckling, but like, don't email her because she ain't gonna email you back. That's not true, Chelsea. I'm actually pretty good at email. I would say, so all full transparency, I get married in a week. So expectations, not going to respond to any emails. But the best way to to communicate, they can use my UMD email, which is a good one. I can put it in the chat,
Cool.
Which is EJC0508 yeah, that's a good one.
Okay,
Shut up, Chelsea. I can see that. And then, or if that, yeah, that should be, I mean, it comes to my phone. So, and this is all, it's part of UMD family. So that'll work.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And I apologize to the rest of our guests for taking up so much of Ebonie's time. I'm going to turn it over now. I'm going to open it up and bring Olivia back in. Thanks again. I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Charlie.